Well, this show, I hardly ever come to London, and I think I've been here maybe twice in the last 20 years. And the piece, open-ended, came in completely trashed because it had been detailed in another mill than the one I usually work in because of an overload of other work that was going in the shop. So they moved it to another shop, which I hadn't worked in before, and the shop had an overhead crane in it that was constantly moving back and forth. So there was a lot of grease that had been poured just all over the piece, and it had me hysterical for about the first 3 days that I was here. In fact, I was relatively pissed off. But what happened is that they had a crew of very young people here, which I am eternally grateful, because you're inhaling toxic fumes, you have a mask on to rub that piece down. There was a woman who kind of took over the job, I think a student at the Courtaulds named Ashley, and she organized a group of about 10 or 12 very young people, and they put a tremendous effort into cleaning that piece up, and it really did relieve my anxiety as of yesterday, because I was completely hysterical about it. If I had to give a brief on what I thought was interesting about contemporary sculpture, it would be site and context. And basically what I bring to site and context are my own toolbox, which deals with weight, gravity, load, stasis, cantilever, weight, balance or lack of, and placement. Some pieces are totally driven by their context. I did a piece about 4 months ago in the Grand Palais, and I would have never have made that piece if it weren't for the context. So some pieces really indicate to me what is the potential of dealing with a site in relationship to the material I use to structure a context and allow you to see a tension within that context, and hopefully return the volume to one of sculpture, not just one of architecture, even though it may point to the sculpture. One of the things I've always been interested in is, I think, material or matter in itself imposes its own form on form. And by that what I mean is that any material you use or any matter that any artist is involved with, to the degree that they investigate the material is to the degree that they're able to invent within the properties of that material. I think Louis Kahn said, I look at a brick and ask it what it wants to be. I think if you don't do that, then you're probably at the receiving end of what's already been done in terms of a commodification, and you have less chance of entering into invention and experimentation. I mean, if you think of these pieces, at one point I started building torque ellipses, and it was very, very hard to see if they were going to be able to be manufactured. I had to go one around the world, and for 3 years I couldn't find a place to build them. Actually, there was a place here that makes the Trident subs that I might have got online, and then they canceled right at the end. The reason I wanted to build them in steel is that I wanted the coil of compression. I wanted the weight to be reduced to a certain kind of speed. All the architects I knew said, make it in concrete. If I had made those pieces in concrete, not only would I have been begging the question of its comparison to architecture or abutment structures or whatever, but I think even in your own imaginative mind's eye, you understand that there's a difference between how your body relates to concrete and its porousness and its mixture than, say, if we had built it in glass or plastic or wood or stainless steel, for that matter, which has a certain kind of relation to products that are made for other purposes. didn't seem to me that to continue with working with steel had a chance of being relevant for any other generation. I think I had an advantage because as a kid, I came from a very poor working class family, managed through my education to get myself to Cal and then to Yale, where I was subjected to a lot of very, very interesting critics, Reinhardt, whomever, Rauschenberg, whatever. And because I knew enough about the procedures and making of steel, at one point after I'd been experimenting with rubber and lead, I thought, if I look at what's been done in the history of art in terms of steel, and I thought I really didn't want to pick it up because of its conventional use, I thought no one is using it in the way that I understood it. No one had been using it in the way that it was actually made for in the Industrial Revolution, meaning that they hadn't used it for its stasis, its weight, its counterbalance, its equilibrium. They hadn't used it for its mass. They hadn't used it for its gravitational load. What they had done was cut and folded it and used it as a three-dimensional surrogate for painting where its basic fundamental balance was untrue. That means that it was either bolted or welded and hung out in space and painted purple, pink, or blue or yellow to be a surrogate for painting. I think works are only interesting if they don't reach closure. Once they reach closure, there's no reason to go back to them. When I was very young, I was a student at Yale, and I went to the Modern and I saw Matisse's Red Room, and foolishly I listened to that thing that they plug in your ear. And then I went back to New Haven, and I came and I had both that recording of that language in my head, and I had my recollection of what I thought that painting was in my mind's eye. When I went back to see the Matisse Red Room, it was much smaller than I had remembered it in my mind's eye, but it was much bigger in what it evoked, and it had nothing to do with the language that was coming through the academic circuitry. And I think works are interesting in that they fulfill in us something we lack, and if you can continually return to them, being a different place in a different time anyway, if the work hasn't reached closure for you, then they're fulfilling in ways that other things aren't. I think that's one of the things that art does, whether it's music, painting, poetry, sculpture, or whatever. It allows us to understand what we lack. And I think that's the reason people have always made art, and it's the reason that cultures are more or less regarded in terms of how they're seen by the signification of what their artists do.